Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Well,
It's been a ripper week for you.
it's been amazing. And, rip a week for you too.
It's been a big one. A lot of long hours,
Yeah.
but a lot of rewarding tasks that have happened this week. The biggest, of course,
Yeah.
being that our podcast went live.
Woohoo!
Woo! Here we are recording episode 6 and we only just dropped episode 1.
Better to be ahead of the game, better to be ahead.
That's right. Exactly. So I think it'd be really just nice to start this episode by saying a massive thank you to, the people that have listened so far, and the feedback that we've been getting has just been nothing but really positive, which is when you release a podcast, it can be a bit nerve-wracking.
It's been amazing.
So it's been really awesome to get that feedback. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely nerve-wracking to see how. Definitely nerve-wracking to kind of see how it was received by everyone. Like that, that had me a bit nervous. But the feedback that we've had and the messages that we've been receiving have just been so amazing. So thank you so much for everyone who took the time to listen and everyone who took the time out of their day to send us a message. We really have appreciated every single one that's come through.
Yeah, warm fuzzies galore, that's for sure. And I think it's only going to get better because we'll stop talking about ourselves. Unless you want to hear more about us.
Just wait for next one.
Oh, funny.
So what have we got on the cards for today's episode, Bron?
All right, well, today's episode, we are going to be talking about timelines because I think it's fair to say, even just in the last week, It's like you and I were talking about this probably at the end of last week about how we're always, it's one of the first questions that comes up is, how long is my project going to take, or how long is it going to take through council, or how long until we start construction, or how long will construction be? And then you and I were talking about that, and then literally we had this meeting together for a new collaboration on Monday, and sure enough, what was one of the first things asked?
Yes. How long does this type of work take?
Yeah.
How long does it take until it's approved? And in some cases, that can be how long is a piece of string, right?
Some or yeah. Definitely.
True.
When the bigger the project, the more moving parts, and therefore the harder it is, more people involved, and there's so many different things that can impact it. So we're going to talk about all of that today, and then potentially give everybody a few, well, just probably more like educate around what happens in the back end and why it's not always feasible to give definitely an accurate timeline right at the start.
Yeah, it's probably more about like an insight into why. And I think like you say, Bron, it's all about education. I mean, we say it all the time, but you don't know what you don't know. So let's hope by the end of this it gives you a bit more of an explanation as to why.
That's right, exactly. And also how you can play your role in keeping things moving as well, because there's definitely responsibility on both sides with the homeowner, the builder, and then of course any other professionals that are working in and amongst the project, like yourself with council and that kind of thing. So maybe we can start off by talking about what are the reasons, why does this question come up? Why are people always wanting to know about timelines? Seems pretty obvious, but maybe not always.
Yeah, maybe not always. I think in a lot of cases it has to do with excitement a lot of the time. Right? It doesn't matter what type of project it is, you're obviously doing it to enhance your house, your lifestyle, whatever the reason is behind doing the work. And I think once you kind of sign on the bottom line and you're handing over your hard-earned cash to someone to start their project, it's almost like, well, all right, so we've started. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Like, how long is it going to be until I'm going to be able to use it and be in it and really feel what it's like? And how long is it going to be until I can really reap the benefits from what we've started here? I feel like that's probably most cases, but there are obviously different examples out there.
Yeah.
But what do you come across, Bron?
Yeah, look, definitely the excitement factor, and we very much live in a world where people are like, they want it now, they want it yesterday, and so that's certainly a big role in it. And then there's the practical side of it, working through logistics. So, for example, if it's a homeowner, they're going to want to start forward planning if they have to either move out of the home, or a lot of people have got pets, so it's like, okay, pet management, how do we work logistics, and am I going to need to organize kennels for the dogs, or are we going to need to go and bunk in with the mother-in-law, or whatever it might be? So logistics, people, particularly
and how
for
long
those,
is that going to take?
and how long is that going to be? Yeah. How long am I going to have to live with the in-laws? Yes, the little things. That people, particularly those that are more, that like to be organised and like to forward plan, and that definitely is a big consideration. But I think probably one of the we'll get to that afterwards. I was about to go down another path, but I think we'll come back to that after. But also we've spoken kind of, this has been speaking to sort of the homeowner, the excitement with the homeowner. But do you actually come across this with your work and builders? Because I imagine they're not necessarily going to be like, when's this project getting through council? Like, because of the excitement, but they would have other reasons for wanting to keep it moving. Their clients doing that to them, but why are they asking about timelines?
Yeah. So I think from a builder's perspective, timelines are really important because hitting milestones means cash in their pocket, and cash flow is king when it comes to business. So for them, it's definitely a case of asking about timelines to make sure that they can kind of keep an eye on how things are going, how long it's going to take, and in their own mind kind of plan out when they're going to be able to put in progress claims and stuff like that with their own clients. That's a massive part of it. And also, I think another part that plays into it with builders is when it comes to the insurance side of home indemnity insurance, builders have a cap on how much they can have on their books at one time. So it's good for them in a way to know how many, obviously they've got to keep a very close eye on how much they do have on the books and how many jobs and what they're worth. But then also it's good for them timeline wise to know how long roughly a project is going to take, because then they know how long it's going to be on their books and how long it will be until they can take on another project.
Yeah, absolutely. So the financial side of it for sure. And do you know what comes to mind when I think about that is then scheduling. So when's it going to be? So I know when I can start this job, what trades do I need to line up? Who do I need to have ready waiting in the wings? Who's busy? Who's doing what? Particularly, when there is a bit of a trade shortage or there's a lot of things going on, scheduling becomes harder and harder. So if they know how long to expect things to get through council, they can pre-plan as well.
Yeah. Of course. And the other thing I think along the scheduling side of things is that the last thing that a builder wants is to have trades sitting around waiting between jobs as well. So it's kind of a really fine line between making sure you've got the trades available, but also making sure that they're not sitting around for weeks on end without anything to do.
That's it. Or the other way, they've overloaded their trades.
And
then they're not delivering on their promise to the client. So you can understand why people ask about timelines. There's a lot of things that are hinging off how long a project's going to take at various stages, so people can get things happening.
Actually, another point on that would be the investor side of things. So an investor may ask about timelines because time is money when it comes to investment. So making sure that, a project is going to be finished in a good amount of time so that they know roughly when they are going to have handover, which means that then they can have people coming in and starting to lease out that property as well. Or if it's a build and flick, then when are they going to be able to put it on the market? There's a lot around timelines and time frames. Yeah,
absolutely. So then why, if it's such an important topic of discussion and there's so much hinging off it, why can we not give someone an accurate timeline right at the start when they ask? Because it's a fair question,
there's
obviously.
so much that goes into it. I mean, it is a fair question, and it goes along with, you know, knowledge and things like that as well, because obviously if you're talking about homeowners, or even people that are just not aware, like there might be investors as well, that might not be aware of how the back end of it works. There's a bit of knowledge required for them to understand how it kind of all plays out. And it's a fair question to ask, but it's such a difficult one to answer.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about the compliance side of things, and, you know, the drafting and like working drawings and planning drawings and all of that, a lot of it does hinge on the time that it takes for our client to do their part as well. So it is such a difficult question to ask. Like, I could give you timeframes that council will take on things, but it really does depend on, as far as the secondary consultants and drafting time frames and things like that goes, well, that depends on our workload at the time. You know, is it a busy time of the year? Is it a busy point in construction? Is the industry itself just really busy? Because
has
if
a government
it is,
grant
then
just
time
dropped
frame,
and all of a sudden everybody's loaded?
Yeah, I mean, there's that. Yeah. So if that's the case and you're building through one of those times and you're working through one of those times, your timeframes are going to be a lot longer than if we were kind of in a quieter period where we could, you know, hash things out quite quickly. But then, you know, when it comes to the compliance side of things as well, we also have to ask the clients to review documents. We have to ask them to sign forms that need to go into council because they are legal documents, so they do need owners' signatures on there. And sometimes it takes, you know, a day or two to get those back from our clients. Sometimes it could take weeks and lots of follow-up on our behalf. And if that's the case, then it's just going to blow out the whole project because it's waiting for those signatures, which we can't do anything without.
Which, by the way, while you're chasing people for signatures, it's now pulling you off other jobs, which is then slowing down their project.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's a knock-on effect. It really is.
Yeah. And so everything you've just spoken about, like with the compliancy, when you look at a project from initial client contact right through to construction, that there, the compliancy is like one section in the middle, and you can see how the timeline can be extensive just in that one section. Whereas even before we get to, because by the time we've got to council and compliancy, we've already gone through a good portion of the design stage. So when I look at it with, say, homeowners particularly, you know, we've got a ton of client back and forth to do before we even get there. And so a lot of the timeline delays come from how decisive or not homeowners are. Obviously, you don't want to rush them because you want to make sure they're getting the right decisions. But if I've met someone for the first time at consultation and they've gone, well, how long is it going to take before we can start, you know, construction? I'm like, well, how many questions have you got? How many revisions are you going to make me do? You know, what's the workload?
That's it, and it all takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I think that's probably, if we were to summarize the answer to why can't accurate timelines be given right at the start, simply there is way too many, you know, links in the chain that all have their own variation dependent on a number of things. And so it's very hard to you know, give a timeline for that reason.
So for you, where in the process do you think is a reasonable time to be able to provide a timeline or a time frame to your clients?
Yeah. What I like to do at the start is give them a perfect world timeline. So we'll get back to that later on as to maybe what that could look like. So I use that as an anchor and go, in an ideal world, if you were my only client, if you were the only person in the world building a house right now or doing a renovation, this is what would be a reasonable expectation for us getting through. But then I come with a caveat on that. this is how long we might take in concept design, but again, it depends on how many questions you've got and how many iterations we do. Or this is how long a typical project for this scale would take going through selections process. But again, it depends on how many things you want to see, how much you want to touch and feel versus how much you'll take my word for it, all of that kind of thing. So from my perspective, with definitely through early design stages when we're fleshing out all the different possibilities, until we've got over that hurdle and until we've locked in floor plans, locked in our basic concepts, and even got a good way through our selections, and they've got their first preliminary estimate from the builder, at that stage we can go, okay, well, we know what we're doing now. We know the scope of the project, you know where your costing's sitting. So from here, it's just tweaking X, Y, Z to work up the rest of it. And it's a process of administration with documenting. This, of course, is working off a project that doesn't necessarily need council. So maybe it's internal renovation, there's no structural changes, or it's a simple bathroom, kitchen renovation, for example. So it does become easier at that point to then go, okay, so we should be able to get this out in a perfect world within this time frame. But like you say, then it's dependent on workflow. In WA here, we have a lot of FIFO workers. So, dependent on their roster, if there's decisions that have to be made where both parties need to be there, then we're only getting to work on the project every third week or every other week, which we've then got to fit into the schedule as well. So, it's a really tricky one to give an accurate. And then, of course, if we've got council, then I tend to be doing all of the design development and selections and things while you're at council doing your thing, just to sort of keep things moving and to keep the client, not losing their minds while they're waiting 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks for a bloody development approval. Once we get like our building permit or even just our development approval, which is the first of sort of the three major milestones, that's, once we get over that big hurdle and I think decisions are made, then we can start talking to the builder and go, right, what are your timelines? What's your scheduling looking like? Realistically, when can we start penciling it in? And then working towards that.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I think it's a good way to work it, actually. Like ideal world versus how it could look. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it.
Best case, worst case.
Yeah, and no doubt it'll be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and again, depending on, it's. I don't laugh like laughing at, but I laugh because it just comes up all the time. The ones that are pushing the timelines the most are the ones that hold up the project the most.
Generally, we find the same thing. Yes,
you find that as well.
Yeah.
We need to move. We need to move. We're in a hurry. We need this done by this date. Okay, well, get back to me on time. Don't sit on my emails for 3 weeks.
Yes.
Choose the friggin' tile.
Sign the form. Oh my gosh.
Oh dear.
We'll even send it to you electronically through DocuSign if it makes it easier.
Yeah. Oh dear me. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm reading through our notes.
Yeah.
Cos and I, we go on so many tangents and we get so excited and passionate talking about our thing that we write ourselves some notes so that we try and stay on track and don't go off on tangents. And then the tricky thing about that is that I have to concentrate on reading at the same time as holding conversation and actually hear what Kasula has to say. And now I'm lost and I reckon we've jumped all over the place anyway.
I think we have.
Oh, well, it's organic. The nature of the beast.
That's right.
So maybe
that's
what
exactly
we talk
right.
about is what are some things that I guess if we've now made everybody aware of, why timelines can get held up and all of the different things that can contribute. Some things are going to be out of everybody's control and some things are going to be within your control. So maybe I can talk about,
Yes.
you know, from the homeowner's perspective, what are things a homeowner can do to ensure that their timelines are met or given the best chance of being met. And then perhaps you could speak into, you know, from what you see and what builders and the companies that you work with can be doing. And I guess we just alluded to it just then, having a bit of a laugh.
Yeah. There's probably more though, you know, I'm sure.
Cool. So from a homeowner perspective, really the biggest hold up, the biggest part of the process that holds us up is during selections. And if you go back and listen to our previous episode, we talk about this in depth through, because that episode is purely about selections, and it goes into detail about, you know, where process can be slowed, but that typically is the main one. You don't want to rush people making their decisions, but at the same time, you can take forever through that process. Like, and most people come in and think, oh yeah, it'll only take me 2 or 3 weeks to. I'm very decisive. I make up my mind easily. It's okay. We know what we want. I'll believe it when I see it. We know what we want,
and then they get there.
But we still want to go to every single shop. Just to be sure.
Yes.
But we know what we want.
Yeah. Oh, just to be sure.
So, yeah.
And then there are the other people who have no idea, who start looking and then change their mind 6 times on tiles and then end up selecting the first ones.
Always comes back to the first one. Always. So if you're trying to put together your timelines and you are thinking, I'm only going to take 2 or 3 weeks to do my selections, maybe double that. Yeah, because there'll be one thing that you'll get tripped up on, and you just cannot make up your mind because you want to see a few more options or whatever. And then before you know it, a couple of weeks has gone past. By the time you get the information, obviously we do our best to try and help you and get you the information and help you make a decision. But at the end of the day, some people, it's a big financial and emotional investment, as we also speak about in previous episode. And so, you know, you don't want to be, it's important that you make the right decision, but sometimes you can overthink it, and people have massive analysis paralysis. Is that the same? Analysis paralysis.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. So that's probably the biggest trip up, the biggest hurdle in sort of the early design stages. From there, it can, if I'm to speak with all honesty, after that, it's the documentation stage, which takes a long time because it's high detail work. So that very much is left with me. And sometimes if I've got a bottleneck and a lot of projects to manage, then, you know, yes, in an ideal world, if you're my only client, then that should only take a few days. But reality is we're juggling multiple clients, and you might sit down to work on some drawings, and then a builder rings you and has an issue out on site, and you just want to, you know, you've got to deal with that because it's then and there. The job's on hold until you sort it, and it pulls you away from working on something else. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, but it can. And it's those little things in a day that can slow you down, and you come back and you're like, shit, where was I? And it takes you a bit to get back into it. So I'm not saying it's all the client's fault why things get held up, but certainly
there's also sickness as well. I mean, you know, recently, and we've spoken about it on a couple of podcasts, I was out for a while with COVID, and you know, it may not be COVID, but it could be the flu, it could be anything, and that just throws things out, because while you're sick, you know, if you're working at all, it's very minimal, so that you can rest and recover and get better as quickly as possible. But at the same time, when you come back to work, you have all of the stuff that happened while you're away to catch up with, as well as the work that you should have been doing when you were sick. So it just blows out.
Big time. Can I also add that when clients don't get back to you on time, you know, again, you don't want to rush them, so you leave it with them. But I'm not sitting there twiddling my thumbs waiting for them to respond. I'm now getting new projects happening as well, so I don't hold up their timelines. So then that client A comes back with the answer and expects you to then have their project finished tomorrow. And it's like, well, hang on, I've been waiting for you, and now I'm working on project B, client B, because they're ready to go.
Yes.
So, you know, I'm, you know, a designer or yourself, you probably find this with the businesses you work for, you know, you send the information out, you get the answer. If you don't get it straight away, that file has been put on the bottom of the pile, or maybe not the bottom of the pile, but it's been put aside and you're now working on the next ones. So if you could delay getting back to us by a couple of days, which you've actually delayed your project another week, because that's going to be the next opportunity, because the rest of the time's been allocated to other projects.
That's correct. And you can't stop working on those other projects, because if you do, then they're going to fall down as well. And you're going to just increase the amount of people that you're letting down, plus also increase your workload. I mean, you need to keep things moving and keep things flowing and just work through each of them. And, you know, you do allocate a certain amount of time to each project. But like you say, if you don't have the information to complete that portion of it, you have to move on to something else.
Yeah, exactly. So where do you, how does that translate to the businesses that you deal with on your side of things?
So I think the hold up for our side of things sometimes can be just not getting information back. You know, we actually, let's start right from the beginning. When we are sent a new project, sometimes information is missing and we can't even start or schedule that project for a drafting date until we have all of the information. And we used to schedule projects and then try to scramble to get the information, but it got to a point where, you know, you have such a big workload and you're trying to keep everyone happy and trying to work through everything in a timely manner as well, so that you're not being the hold up and the reason for the hold up. But when you don't have all of the information and you cannot start a project, we have just taken a stance that we won't even schedule that project until we have all of the information, because there's no point having it in the system taking up a drafting slot that something else could be drafted in if we don't have everything that we need to start that job. So that's kind of where we've got to on that. And then the other delays kind of come in when we have sent. So the way that we work is it's probably the way that a lot of businesses out there work, but we will draft up plans and then we send them to our client to have a look over them, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, to make sure that we haven't missed anything, to make sure that they don't want to make any minor adjustments at that stage, because that's kind of the time to do it before we start going to council. So we'll send plans for confirmation, and when we do that, if it takes longer than a couple of days to come back, then we kind of start thinking, well, all right, maybe they didn't get my email, so we follow up another way. And then, like we sort of alluded to earlier, you start going down this process of following up and following up and following up. But while you're doing that, that's taking time away from other projects as well. So just not getting people coming back to us to keep the process moving along smoothly. You know, there is only so much that is in our control, and we can be there to guide and to help as much as possible. But when it's not kind of coming back the other way, it really makes things hard. And then you get emails from them asking why it hasn't been finished yet and they haven't seen the new plans come through. You're like, well, hang on a minute. It took this long for you to come back to us. We have scheduled your job again for amendments, and that's totally fine, but it's going to happen here instead of today. So, and then when we do send out confirmation plans for confirmation, we also send out at that point to try and keep the ball moving as much as along as quickly and as nicely as we possibly can. We send out any forms that we need signatures on at that same point, so that we have everything ready to go. It's sitting there. You know, if the plans come back and they're confirmed and it's all good, we've got the signed planning application form, well, we go straight into council from there, because we've already done all the justification letters in the background. We've already looked into the R codes and all the planning policies and everything like that. We've already got all of that ready to go. We're literally just waiting for those plans to be confirmed and the forms to be signed, and then we're straight into planning from there. And then we've also got the building application form signed at that point as well. So that's ready to go once planning approval comes through. We've just, we need to wait for planning to then go through to the secondary consultants like your engineer and, energy efficiency if we need those sorts of things. But yeah, it's really just the information coming back to us or coming through to us in the first place that really holds up our process, because the way that we work internally, we've got our processes like nice and tight.
Someone just walked past the house.
I'll do that bit again. Yeah. Is he good?
Yeah, I think so. They've just both scurried out of the house, out of the room.
So the way that we work internally, we have our processes nice and tight, and we do move things along quite smoothly. It's just the only holdups that we kind of run into are getting that information back or getting those forms signed.
All right. Slight interruption there with the doggos. There's a sudden edit in our podcast. This is why. The delivery man came and the dogs went nuts, so we just had to pause the podcast there for a second, but we're back now. What you were just saying, Cos, like, it's a catch-22 because you don't want to get through a big portion of work and then at the end do the final sign-off with the client or the builder or whoever it is, and then all of a sudden them come back and go, oh, no, we want to change this, we want to change that, I want to change that, and you have to redo everything. So there's a reason why we've got these other touch points where you are getting things signed off and checked along the way. But because we're opening the door to more touch points, there's more room for timelines being, elongated, because at every one of those touch points, then, I mean, definitely when I work with homeowners, same thing. We're sending them plans and updates of things along the way. But sometimes it's a balancing act, because sometimes the more you do that, the more opportunity there is for them to go, oh, we've just thought of this and we've just thought of that. And, it's like, okay, that's not actually why I emailed you. I asked you just to go over I just needed you to check that you're happy with the full plan, and then we can move on to the next stage. And they're like, oh, yeah, we're thinking we might do this and this and that. And you don't want to disservice them and brush them off. So, but it all adds to time. And so people don't realise they get in their own way
really does.
Without realising. Yeah.
Actually, on one more point on the timelines with the compliance side of things is every now and then when we send something through for planning into council, council will put a grinding halt on our application and decide that they can't make the decision for supporting the proposed development or not in-house, and that they need to send it to a council meeting. And the next council meeting may not be happening for another 2 months. Well,
awesome.
That's it. That's all that happens on the application until that council meeting happens and it's signed off by the council.
That's just unlucky, isn't it?
It's not just the council as in, and it's happened a couple of times, and it's just for crazy stuff. I mean, for carports, there was a carport that we had to go to the actual council meeting, which is with the councillors, not the actual people that work in local government.
I'm not expecting any more deliveries, so I don't know what the dogs are barking at now, but let's just ignore them and hope that they hush soon enough. I think they're getting excited because, someone just got home next door. Sorry, everybody.
Right.
I got 2 dogs here at the moment, so it's they set each other off.
Yeah, they do. So, it's just one of those things that unfortunately at some of the time we just can't foresee that that's going to have to happen. And if it does, it really just does throw a spanner in the works, and timeframes for planning just completely get thrown out the window. But we do keep our builders completely 100% informed. And if that does happen, it's a case of like touching base with council, get all the information, and then we'll actually jump on the phone and speak to our builders and just let them know what's going on, why and when they can expect a resolution. So
I'm really glad you mentioned
trying to keep
that.
in touch with everyone.
Yeah. So it's awesome that you communicate it in real time as things are happening so that everybody obviously is aware and can
Yes.
shimmy their plans however they need to shimmy them. But, you know, again, this is
Yeah.
something that when we get asked that question right at the start by the client, by the builder, by the investor, you know, what's our timelines? Why can't we have an accurate timeline? To give them that, in an ideal world, this is how it could look, but more than likely it's not going to be an ideal
Yes.
world. And we have had instances where XYZ can happen. I know I've certainly given examples in
Yeah.
the past where I've had, you know, new home builds take 9 months through council to tweak the plan by like 1%.
Yeah.
And that's completely out of your control. So,
Yeah.
you know, I know I like to brief clients at the start as to this is how it could look in an ideal world and this is how it could look worst case scenario. Hopefully, let's cross our fingers that it doesn't
Yes.
look like that, but you need to have contingencies in place in case it does. And obviously, like you said before, if the industry is experiencing delays or a sudden government grant being dropped upon us all.
Yes.
You know, you need to keep that in the back of your minds. Communication is key.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, it is 100%. Just keeping everyone in the loop so they know where they stand. That's just so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've spoken a lot to the compliance side of things, and we've spoken a lot to the builders and homeowners. But what about reasons why builders and designers kind of really need to keep in contact for timelines and things like that? This is probably more in your wheelhouse than it is in mine. But what's your experience with that, Bron?
Yeah, and a good segue off the communication conversation as well. You know, it's really important for several different reasons across many different components of the process why the designer and the builder should be in constant communication. And you know, for homeowners listening to this, my biggest tip is get your builder and your designer, if they're not an in-house team, which, you know, there's some companies that design, construct, manage and do it all, and they'll be talking to each other anyway. But if you've got a model where you've pulled in your builder and you've pulled in a designer, it's imperative that those two work together and talk, because, you know, you might have the designer working along their timeline and the builder's thinking in their mind, okay, well, I'm going to schedule this one in October, which is great. And then the designer's not going to be ready until November. Or, you know, the designer, you know, I know that I'm juggling multiple files at once, and typically my default will be to work through my files in the order that the project came to me, so first in, best dressed. But the reality is people have different timelines, and depending who their builder is and their builder's timeline, you know, one project might have to skip up the queue or skip down the queue a little bit to suit whatever their timeline is. So, you know, one builder might have come in and gone, right, I've got this project, I've got a window of opportunity here to get in this quick little kitchen renovation. We know that we can do it, but it means we need to jump on it. So we do what we can to try and make that work for everybody involved. But it means that I need to pull that client forward ahead of some others that maybe don't have as urgent timeline. And then, you know, if you've not communicated, if the builder's not communicated their needs with me as a designer, or if I've not communicated maybe what's going on in my world with the builder and let them know that yes or no, this can or can't be deliverable, then someone's going to mess up somewhere along the line, and there's going to be, you know, someone's needs are not going to be met. And at the end of the day, that's then going to be the client, the homeowner, that loses out. So it's just really important that everybody involved is communicating. And then if we're adding, say, the services of yourself in the mix because it's a bigger project, then it's then important that we extend that communication out to yourself, so you know, right, this is the plan, this is what we're aiming for. Obviously there's things outside of our control, but ideally what we'd love to do is get this project scheduled for a November start date, you know, whatever it might be. And as a part, you know, if November's our start date, you know, my commitment as a designer is to have the drawings finished by late September, so that the builder's got a good, you know, couple of months to line up trades, sign their contract, finish off insurances, council, all that stuff, and then obviously good enough lead time to start construction.
So you touched on your ideal world timeline earlier, Bron, and how you communicate this with your clients. I'd love for you to expand on that a little bit and just to hear a bit more about how you do with your side of things with clients and homeowners as well. That'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have one ideal timeline that suits everybody because obviously everybody's projects are different. But I can say to them, because I might have one client and their project is a bathroom. That's it. And I might have another one and their project involves council, and another one it's a multiple room project, but we've got a lot of cabinetry in there, so we need to consider cabinetry timelines. But regardless of what the size of the scope is, I think about previous jobs that I have done that are the same size, and I go, right, this is typically how it looks. I explain my process. I explain the different steps with concept design and design development and the design documentation. I then explain how that integrates with third-party services. So we get it to here with the design, and then we reach out to the builder and we get this information. And at this point, we need to reach out to engineering and we get this information and yourself and whatever. So I'll explain it to them in forwards order, in chronological order, without actually giving them dates, like times, just so they can understand the process. And then from there, I then reverse engineer it. So particularly if they've got a set time in mind. So one of my first questions I ask the client, I actually bring up timeline. We always get pegged with the question, how long does it take? But I intentionally bring it up because I want to tap this on the head and manage the expectation. So if they've not brought it up first, one of my first questions is, do you have a deadline? Do you have a desired timeline? Have you got an expectation around when you want to have your renovation complete? And it'll either be, no, we haven't really thought about it. We just want to make sure we get it all right, which I take for face value at the time, because as we get going, they get excited, like what you were saying before. And then all of a sudden they do want it yesterday.
Yeah.
Or it is, yes, we've got family coming over for Christmas. That Christmas is usually a big one. And again, we'll talk about that in another episode. Or, I've just got family coming over. Or a lot of the time people are going on holidays. And so they're trying to align their holiday period with when demo happens on their house so they can intentionally be out of the house. Now, if that's a number of months away, amazing. But if it's close, then I know it's not going to work. So what I do is I get that date that they give me. So let's say we're end of June now. So let's say they say to me, March, we want it done before winter next year. So preferably we'd like to have our renovation finished by March 2024. Beautiful. Let's work back from that. So if the size of your renovation is, let's say it's a nothing too crazy. Let's say it's a kitchen, laundry, bathroom renovation, so multiple room project, but we are going to change some glazing out the back of the house because the kitchen and main living area looks out to the backyard. We want to put in some big stacker doors, and there's a few little internal structural modifications to be made. So we're going to need council approvals. We're going to need to go through that process, and all parties going to need to be involved. So it's a significant project, even though it's not a new home build. We go, right, so for that size project, construction roughly is going to take anywhere from, say, 8 to 12 to 16 weeks, depending on the scope. And at that stage, when I'm explaining this, we don't know the extent of the scope, so all I can give is ballparks. So let's take the worst case scenario. Let's say it's going to be 16 weeks. That's 4 months. So we come back. That means we've got to start construction in November. But we've also got Christmas in the middle of that. So there's going to be a shutdown period. So really we need to be starting construction, if we can, sort of back in October. So if we're starting construction in October, the builder's going to need 4 to 6 weeks lead time to schedule their trades, to order materials. Your cabinet maker is going to need definitely 6 to 8 weeks of ordering materials. Now, of course, they don't need to be in there day one, so there's a bit of crossover and leeway, but that's a big one. Glazing is another one that needs big lead times. So, you can't sign your contract and expect to start construction the next day. There's going to be at least a month to 6 weeks of lead time. So if we're aiming to start construction in October, then we need to make sure that our building contract is signed. I'm going to do months backwards, October, September. In middle of August, even if we go 6 weeks. So middle of August is when you need to sign your building contract. Now, if we're signing our building contract in the middle of August, that means that for the builder to sign your contract, they need all of the council approvals. They need all of the working drawings from your interior design and your building design. They need all your spec sheets. Yeah. So how long is it going to take the designer to do that? I then give them my estimate of how long it will take me for that work, roughly, because, again, everything we've discussed today, timelines and other clients and workload and blah, blah, blah. So, we need to be making up all of our selections by said date, which where were we? Middle of August to have contracts signed?
We were middle of August,
Middle of August to have contracts signed. I need to write this shit down. Normally I've got a pen and paper and I am write this down for them too so they get the visual cue as well. And I'm getting the visual cue. So if I'm going to need, let's call it 2 to 3 weeks to bring documentation together. So we come back to sort of start of August, even end of July, somewhere in there. And then, for me to get that documentation together, like what you said, we're not going to start working on a file until we have all of the information. Because if we're working on it in drips and drabs, shit gets missed and then it'll come back on us. So hard and fast rule, until we have all the info, we don't even start documentation. But we then have the selections process to go through to get all that information. And like I said before, that could be optimistically 2 to 3 weeks, but more realistically for a multi-room or a whole home project is going to be probably a good number of weeks. And that's the bit of how long's a piece of string. So if we're sort of end of July from when I start putting the documentation together, that could be all of July that we've taken to do that. We're now back at the end of June or the start of July, which is exactly where we are now. And we still have concept design stage to do before we even get to selections. So when I give
so essentially that's probably not a realistic timeline.
Or we could make it happen because I have inflated and given sort of like I've been conservative, but we could then try and push things through, and it just means that the client is going to have to be on the ball and they're not going to what it does is it gives them the perspective of, okay, realistically, this is how long it's going to take. So we know we can't mess around. We know we need to be making swift decisions because we've got a timeline to adhere to give us the best chance of meeting our March deadline. But of course, that doesn't give you much contingency if council all of a sudden put a hold on your plans, or if you do hit any sort of hurdle or sticking point through the selections process or anywhere really. Maybe about a year ago, engineers were the ones holding things up, and it was taking like literally 3-4 months just for an engineer to get back to you with their bloody report because they were at a bottleneck. So, bottlenecks can occur at any point in the process with any person, depending on what's going on in the workload and just so many different conditions. But I find that as far as explaining it to a client, if I can reverse engineer the timeline and give them a realistic view of how that's going to look, that helps them understand, okay, well, really, I can't afford to drag our feet, or yes, we've got a bit of time, but we know that we're going to need to hustle. And that helps them with their planning as well. They can go, okay, well, realistically, we're going to be needing to be tidying up the house about here. We're going to need to do our cull, because with every good renovation comes a good cull of stuff in the house. So we're going to need to get that into action, at this point, so that we can move out at this point, so that we can whatever. Yeah.
Very cool. I like it.
I guess that's not really the ideal world situation. I could then look at that once I've taken that reverse engineered model and go, here's the quickest it could happen.
Yeah.
If we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this, but it's fraught with danger if you've not allowed yourself contingency. So we can hope for this, but we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I think if you've outlined both scenarios, it's all about education, and knowledge is power. So, it helps the understanding process coming back from the owner and the homeowner as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Managing expectations, always.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Yes. Such an important part of business.
Yeah. Across all fronts, definitely. Hopefully, do you think we've given everybody a bit of like a decent enough rundown of that? If you're listening,
I think so,
and you feel like we need to explain something a little bit more, please touch base. There's always an option.
Yeah,
if you're
let
listening
us know.
on Spotify to there's a Q&A area on Spotify, which we've just found out about, that you can actually we'll put a question in there pertaining to this, and you can give an answer to that. It's all very private, so don't worry, your answers aren't going to be out there for the world. And that'd be, we can maybe cover that in another episode.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and stay tuned for the next episode.
Hang on. Cause
yeah.
We didn't start the episode how we normally start the episode.
Bron, you forgot to do it.
I didn't forget so much as I did sort of maybe try to buy myself a little bit more time, because it's been a hectic week and I haven't had a chance to think of another one.
Fair enough.
So let me see if I quickly...
Have you got one now?
Let me see if I can quickly think of one now. So your roofing structure. No, we are the underpelling to your roof.
Very nice. I like it. Yes. Very good.
Not bad for off the cuff.
It's going to get harder and harder.
It is going to get harder and harder, but I'm up for the challenge. I'll be more prepared next week, I promise. It's been a week of like 1 a.m. finishes and 6 a.m. get off. So, I'm a little bit, hence the large size coffee today.
Yeah, totally deserve that. Oh my gosh.
Amazing. All right, cool. Well, until next time.
See you, tools.
Oh.